So our first speaker is Daniella Gonzalez from the Hampshire Archives Trust. Daniella is a medievalist by training and completed her PhD in medieval and early modern studies at the University of Kent in 2020. She's currently working on her first monograph, provisionally titled Common Profit and Civic Governance in Ricardian London, circa 1376 to circa 1391, which is to be published with Routledge. She works in the archives and records management sector, currently as a project archivist at the University of Kent on fundraising and pantomime collections. Daniella is also the social media fellow at Hampshire Archives Trust and has developed their digital engagement offer, managing the Trust's social media platforms. The title of her paper is Hampshire's Heritage Revealed, widening engagement with local archives through podcasts and social media. Over to you, Daniella.
Thank you, James, for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about Hampshire Archives Trust and the fantastic, well, what I think are fantastic things that we're doing. And yeah, just a big shout out to Alison for inviting me here today to speak about our kind of digital engagement program and what we're doing on social media. So as part of what we're doing today, well, what I'm talking about today, I'm going to give you a bit of background to Hampshire Archives Trust to start off. I'm then going to talk to you a little bit about the kind of content that we have on our website, which I then share on our social media platforms. And last but not least, I'm then going to talk a little bit about the digital engagement initiatives that I have developed over the last 2 years of working with Hampshire Archives Trust. I should say I've been working with them since February 2022. So it's kind of been a bit of a long process to get there and kind of build up our audiences and make connections. So just to kind of, oh gosh, is this not working? Okay. Just to give you a little bit of background. So Hampshire Archives Trust was established in the 1980s. It was kind of the brainchild of Hampshire County Council. However, because Hampshire Archives Trust, one of its purposes, which I'm going to talk to you about, is to provide funding to preserve archives and support local history projects, it had to sort of stay at arm's length to Hampshire County Council. So it's actually instead a member-led charity run by different officers, and there's various kind of trustees and patrons. And what Hampshire Archives Trust kind of their mission is to do is basically promote Hampshire's rich archival heritage, kind of show people why archive collections are important, why they're kind of special, and also, supporting their preservation, kind of it for Hampshire Record Office and, other places like Winchester College. It's kind of that double thing of raising that awareness of Hampshire-related archives and kind of preserving them for future generations so that other people can use them. And the way that this work is delivered by Hampshire Archives Trust is through education projects. We've got really great links with schools, different events, so in-person events and online events, the grant scheme, so i.e. basically the funding that HAT provides for kind of local history projects, academic projects, or if archives are on auction for places like Hampshire Record Office to be able to purchase these and care for them, various different partnerships as well, which we're always developing. And then kind of what I'm going to be focusing on during this talk is social media and digital engagement and how we reach out to audiences in that way. And the different social media platforms that you can find us on are Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter, or X as it is now known. And I will provide you with kind of the details to follow us at the end of my talk. But as I said, the kind of things that we promote on our website and the kind of content we have relate to grants, educational resources, various events, and just kind of generic news and updates from the Trust. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these 4 areas. So in terms of our grants criteria, sometimes we give much smaller grants or slightly larger grants. As you can see on the slide, they're anywhere between 500 and 10,000 You know, we kind of encourage the wider knowledge and understanding of archives. It's a way for us to help those researching Hampshire archives, researching Hampshire topics, supporting kind of publications of books. So, for example, we were able to support the publication of a book on Fording Bridge and the workhouse there, kind of with the local history society, giving them kind of financial support to be able to print that. You know, this is one of our kind of selling points as a trust and what we really kind of work towards doing. So sharing that on social media, kind of sharing deadlines, when the next round of grants is up. I think it's about 3 times a year that we sort of, you know, give out grants, award them, examine projects, although I'm not part of the team that does that. I'm just sort of there to share it online. And these are just some of the examples of the grants that we've been able to fund. I mean, this is just a kind of snapshot. We've been able to fund a lot more, but as you can see, we've been able to fund the East Boulder Community Heritage Project. So we gave them £500 to mount a travelling exhibition so that they can make what they're doing more widely accessible. We've also been able to support an academic project at Royal Holloway University of London, looking at music in Hampshire. And we also have been able to fund cataloguing projects. We're able actually to do this quite a bit with Hampshire Record Office. And what you can see there is just a cataloguing project on the Women's Institute records, which are held at that local record office. One of the things that we've also been developing over the last couple of years, and I've been involved in this to an extent, is our relationships with schools in Hampshire. My colleague, Alistair Dougal, who you can see in one of the photos on the slide, is kind of responsible for organising this, approaching schools. We initially started out as a kind of history competition just for kind of sixth formers, and secondary schools and primary schools. But actually, we've had such a positive response to this. You know, we got really good feedback on social media, so we've opened it up to university students as well. You know, not just kind of students at Winchester, Portsmouth, or Southampton, but actually university students across various other organisations who are working on Hampshire history. So, you know, again, whenever that comes up, it's my responsibility to kind of think, right, okay, deadline for applications is March, and kind of thinking very strategically about how often I'm going to be promoting this, and giving people plenty of time, obviously, to submit. I mean, the other kind of thing that we do also have on our website, which I regularly post about, is the educational resources that we have to support research into the county. At the moment, we've only been able to develop guides about family history, house history, school history, and just kind of generic local history about tracing the and looking at research into your village or the town that you live in. If anybody has any ideas or suggestions about extra guides or types of histories that would be really exciting to provide guides on, please do say. This is always kind of feedback that we're looking for. And actually, these guides have been really helpful in terms of developing further social media content. And I've been able to bounce off of this and using Canva, start doing kind of weekly sort of top tips to give people kind of Monday motivation, obviously linking into any relevant hashtags so that it's seen more widely. Again, this is just sort of a snapshot, but you can see there some for family history, generic archive research, house history, and I've been able to develop others about, you know, researching women's history, researching Black British history, for example, and obviously trying to maximize that during Women's History Month, Black History Month, when Pride is on as well. So those guides have kind of been a really nice inspiration to think about how else can we engage researchers through social media in kind of fun and engaging ways. And obviously, as you can see, I've stuck to kind of white in a kind of greeny turquoise colour to make sure that people know it comes from Hampshire Archives Trust and fits in with our logo. The other thing that we share on social media to kind of make people aware of what we do is our in-person events. These are some of our recent events that are taking place. So earlier this week, we had a visit to the World War One Remembrance Centre in Portsmouth. Other visits that people can look forward to are going to Old Basingstoke and Basing House or Titchfield Abbey, and kind of a tour of the village. You know, it's really important for us, again, kind of with a schools competition, to make sure this goes out on social media well ahead of time to give people notice. And obviously thinking about posting this content frequently so that it stays in people's consciousness. And again, this kind of shows people, if you become a member of HAT, this is what's on offer, this is what else we provide other than kind of grants and educational resources. We also give kind of, as I said before, share generic news and updates from the trust. So, you know, you'll have seen from the grants page, we've supported this project at East Boulder Community Heritage Project. So, you know, anytime that we give out a new grant, we showcase this. You know, it's not just to kind of celebrate the projects going on, but also to tell people, if you want a grant to purchase an archive, or you're working on a local history project and need some support with either resources or getting it published, we're here to help you. You can see there a post about Nick Shrimpton. He's one of our newest trustees, so we wanted to celebrate and announce that so people are made aware of who makes up Hampshire Archives Trust. And our latest kind of project and idea has been offering a gift membership. So, you know, kind of thinking really strategically at certain points in the year, advertising this. So at Christmas, for example. But, you know, we want to keep people up to date with what we're doing, what we're about. So this kind of gets regularly updated and shared on social media to kind of stay in people's consciousness. I'm now going to move on to the second part of my talk, which is focusing on the digital engagement initiatives that I have been developing as social media. My role is a kind of two-parter. It's about sharing the content that already exists on the website and which might be coming from various officers, trustees, again, kind of the outcomes of our grant scheme. But part of my role is also kind of developing new things which the trust didn't have. And, you know, I very much started off in my role kind of examining what Hampshire Archives Trust had done, what social media platforms they had when I started, what sort of content were they delivering, and kind of what was missing. I should say that prior to starting at Hampshire Archives Trust, I was the social media fellow at the British Association for Local History. So I was able to kind of come into Hampshire Archives Trust knowing what worked at that organisation and what people really enjoyed and seemed to want to contribute to, and obviously develop it for this organisation. So I'm going to talk to you first about the blog. And when I was thinking about the blog and sort of the topics to have, I didn't want it to just be about kind of archives and archive collections. As you saw for the grant scheme, we also support local history projects. So I just kind of wanted it to keep it a little bit broader, thinking about Hampshire heritage more broadly, as a way to be able to engage with a wider set of kind of researchers and audiences, and you know, think more broadly about what people might be interested in. In terms of the topics that we've had, they're always in wide-ranging time periods. We've got medieval history, early modern history, modern topics as well. When I'm thinking about blogs, who to invite to participate in this, I kind of think, right, okay, well, it needs to be something in a sort of place that caters to various interests. And just in terms of contributions, you know, it's been absolutely fantastic, the support that we've had and the reaction to the blog, and kind of, you know, I am very proactive in looking for people to contribute, and I try to keep myself as up to date as possible with current Hampshire topics and projects going on. But actually, it's been really nice to get emails in from people to say, oh, I'm working on this, I've seen you've got this on the website, can I please contribute a piece? I think it's really exciting. And, you know, some people haven't just contributed one blog post, they've actually contributed multiple, which is really exciting. And, you know, I've not just worked with academics. What was really important for me with the blog, I'm thinking very very much about kind of archives and heritage, was, working with people across kind of the GLAM sector, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Local and family historians as well, their voices are just as important. And what's been really, what I found has been really great and I've really enjoyed is I've also had a really good response from students. And I'm not just talking about PhD students, but actually undergraduate students have also contributed to the blog. And I had a really nice group of students approach me from the University of Portsmouth, wanting to contribute a piece, and I think I might have included their piece on the next slide. As part of the blog, what I also did was have blog guidelines. It's really important for me to have consistency, to make people aware of kind of any copyright issues, that anything we use on the website doesn't have any kind of copyright restrictions, or people have the correct permissions. And again, all of this is available on our website. So when I kind of share posts on social media across our different platforms, I always make sure that to direct people back to that. And this again is just a few examples of blog posts. It's only like a short insight. We actually have quite a few now. But you can see we have a blog post from so this person no longer works in public engagement, but at the time they were in public engagement and took a group of students actually to Magdalen College in Oxford and used the collections there, which relate to Hampshire history, so specifically Basingstoke, and shared a post about that. We've also had a post from Dr. Emily Stiles of the University of Winchester about refugee histories in Winchester. Is really exciting, which is part of a wider project that she's doing at the moment. And then, as I just mentioned, we've had blog posts from, undergraduate students as well. And the students who wrote this blog post as part of a undergraduate history module, they had a few weeks working in one of the local Portsmouth museums, curating an exhibition, doing a bit of social media for them, contributing to podcasts. So they wrote about that experience and the kind of research methods for curating that exhibition. And that was really exciting to share. In terms of a podcast, again, really similar to the blog in terms of kind of what sort of topics, engaging more widely in archives, heritage, local history, family history, house history. Again, for me, the podcast was something that I wanted everybody to enjoy. So, I'm a medievalist by training, as James mentioned earlier, but I've been trying to look at projects and people who work across different time periods and, very kind of different topics. Again, in terms of the podcast, not just academics, I've kind of thought more widely. I really want to include heritage professionals, again, local and family historians, house historians. And the whole purpose of the podcast, that they're about various topics, or, I've had a couple of episodes introducing people to Hampshire Archives Trust, so, why our trustees have joined. But a lot of what I do on the podcast focuses around building research skills for people. So, not just, there's this really interesting topic about Hampshire, but if you're interested in that history, how do you go about undertaking that research? Where can you go? What's available for you to do? Also kind of thinking a little bit about the challenges, particularly if you're somebody interested in working on earlier time periods. So raising awareness about needing kind of medieval languages or things like paleography. And in terms of accessing our podcast, we host it on Podbean, have it on Spotify, but we've also made it available on our website. So kind of thinking about our audiences, they tend to be more elderly. They might not have apps on their phones or access to that, whereas they will have access most of the time to a computer or a laptop. And I make sure to liaise with our membership secretary to send her updates about blog posts and podcasts so that these can be circulated and people who are members of ours are made aware. And just to give you a little insight into the podcasts that we have, so far we have recorded 2 series. So series 1 was made up of 10 episodes, and you can see some of these here. We had podcasts about Joan of Navarre and Hampshire. We had Dr. Micah Spester from the University of Portsmouth come and speak about his Work, Life and Death on the Railway project, focusing specifically on Hampshire. And then we also had Michael Gunton, who is the archivist at Portsmouth History Centre, kind of talking about, how do you curate exhibitions, what local history collections are available, and talking about access. In terms of series 2, we had 9 episodes for that. And again, it's really important to me that they're not, they are diverse histories. It's not just kind of the same thing over and over again. So we had Dr. Clifford Williams come and speak about LGBT histories in Hampshire. We also had Dr. Zoe Viney Burgess, who she's just completed a doctorate at Southampton, and she's also a curator at Wessex Film and Sound Archive, and she discussed women amateur filmmakers in Hampshire. So, really kind of highlighting to people that these women's voices are there in the archive, they are important, and that they can be found. And we also had, I spoke lots before about having academics, students, GLAM professionals, but actually for episode 2, where the focus is on medicine in Hampshire, I actually had Dr. Andrew Oswell come on. And, Andrew's not an academic, he is not a heritage professional, he's not an archivist. He's actually a practicing doctor, and it was really interesting to kind of make that link with him. He had given some talks before for Hampshire Record Office, and he was really excited to come onto the podcast and speak about his experience working with some of the records at his hospital. And then in terms of season 3, this is currently being recorded 2 episodes so far, have a few more upcoming, but as you can see on the slide, that's just a little bit of a taste of the different topics that I'm going to be looking at, and kind of some of the really fun things coming to Hampshire Archives Trust. Again, working with a variety of professionals, and actually, rather than, again, thinking about working with people from different backgrounds, for the episode focusing on BAME histories in Southampton, it's actually people who work in performance and theatre and do kind of street performance who are going to be coming and speaking to me about their experience as sharing these histories through performance in Southampton. And then last but not least, I'm just going to talk really briefly about our webinar series, which I started off, during the pandemic. Hampshire Archives Trust hosted these here and there, but they weren't frequent. They had a really good response. So when I came in, I thought, right, they've had good numbers. People have been really enjoying this. Why don't we make this a regular feature? So they're just, they're hosted on Zoom. We've included external and internal speakers. So some of HAT's officers have given talks, and again, academics from other universities, family historians, somebody who's been working on newspapers. They're not a professional historian, but they came and spoke about how to use them. British Newspaper Archive, and again, kind of the webinars are really similar to the podcasts, and thinking about how can you give people practical research skills, like, let's talk about different topics, but also kind of this practical element of how can people go away and look at Hampshire Archives, have that confidence to go into the record office and consult them themselves. Again, like the blog posts and the podcasts, they cover a wide range of topics, different historic periods, because, I want to be able to kind of offer something that's for everyone. And we have, held surveys here and there to ask our members, what else would you like to see? Is there a topic of interest? What do you think has worked? What hasn't worked? So that we can always keep improving this. And then, just in terms of advertising them, these are some examples of webinars that we have previously hosted. Again, kind of like the top tips that I share weekly on a Monday. I use Canva to create posters for this. So, it's not just kind of written text on social media, which sometimes can be a little bit boring, but, there's something visual, there's images, and you can see across these that there are images relating to the talks that have been given about kind of Hampshire VCH, Hampshire and the English Civil War, and about kind of Hampshire and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I'm just going to sort of round off now, but, if you want to find out more about Hampshire Archives Trust, please do follow us. As I said earlier, Our social media platforms are Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter/X. There's a link to our website there, which I will share with you in a moment. And if any of you work on Hampshire histories and you want to contribute to any of our digital engagement initiatives like the blog, the podcast, and the webinar, please do get in contact with me. As I said, I research various projects, but I'm always really happy to hear about what people are doing and feature their research on our website. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to my talk today.
Thank you very much, Daniela. That was really, really interesting. A very varied and dynamic and energetic range of outputs, I would say. I think it must take an awful lot of work to sustain all of that activity. I think it was particularly interesting how you made the point that it's one thing to broadcast information about special collections, have people write stories about the research that they've done, but it's another to engage people in such a way that they can then themselves independently go off and do research. That is a more active form of community engagement than the more traditional uses of social media and blogs. So I think that was really interesting and something for us all to consider. I'm happy to open the floor to questions if anybody has them. Feel free to type them in the chat, and I will pose them to Danielle. But while people are thinking, I suppose I could ask you one question, which you partly answered by saying that you were sourcing them from lots of different areas. But I think one of the challenges I found with blogs and things and social media is the kind of feeding the beast. Is how do you generate enough material to keep the output regular and frequent and varied enough? Do you want to say, is there anything you'd like to say a little bit more about?
Yeah, it is. I'm not gonna lie, it is hard. Obviously, I work full time as a project archivist at the moment, so kind of have to be I guess really organized with my time. Sometimes, I'll get home, do a little bit, but usually I just kind of put aside a morning or an afternoon and a weekend, and kind of schedule things in advance. I find that's more efficient. But in terms of sourcing, I regularly put out calls for blogs or podcasts, but my colleagues are really, really helpful, especially trustees. They're always really keen to be involved. They always ask, like, how can we support you? So one of the things that I'm currently developing, I haven't done it just yet because I do have kind of enough blog posts and promises of blog posts to keep me going. And, everybody's agreed to who's going to feature on the next season of this podcast have agreed. So in terms of that kind of content, I know that's going to be fine. But one of the things that I am starting to develop, I want to kind of give a little bit more, I suppose, for people to kind of get to know HAT a little bit more, get to know the trustees. So one of the things that I have asked trustees to do is kind of fill out like almost like an interview. So, they can talk a little bit about themselves, why they joined HAT, why it's interesting. So yeah, and I didn't even have to badger them really. I was just like, I want to do this. Do you want to get involved? And they're really supportive, really up for it. So I do have kind of internal support, which is great. So, it's not always me kind of chasing or creating content. Also, I mean, I know you mentioned kind of thinking about new content, but I am very guilty of reusing things as well. So if an anniversary comes up, or I don't know, it's like a kind of International World Day or National Day for something, and or I know that there's already content that relates to that, I will reuse that, or kind of say, if you missed this, make sure this month you have a look at this. This is really interesting. It fits in with these themes. So yeah, I do get internal support, but I also think, right, what content can I reuse? How can I reuse it? I mean, I had a podcast interview with Dr. Emma J. Wells. She wrote her book Heaven on Earth. So she did a podcast episode about Winchester and St. Swithin. So I do make sure on the 15th of July, when it's St. Swithin's Day, to bring that back out. So yeah, it's kind of a balance between looking for new things, getting that support, and also thinking, how can I effectively and strategically reuse material?
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, recycling things into different but complementary outputs is a good tactic, a strategy for wringing every last kind of drop of value out of something. Certainly, that's similar or comparable experience on a project has taught me that as well. So I think that's a good tip to share. I've got a couple of questions in the chat. One from David Platt, who asks about social media. His specific question is, do you have any plans to move from Twitter to Mastodon or Blue Sky? And I've been thinking similarly, what effects changes in the social media landscape might be having on the work that you're doing. AMARC would be interested to know.
No, definitely. So I did speak to my colleagues quite a while ago about Mastodon, and it's kind of a bit. I feel like I'm usually the guinea pig, so I just kind of go with, I'll just see what happens on my own personal social media and see if that works. Really, unfortunately, I think I was just really unlucky with Mastodon. I did try to sign up to it, and you know how you have to kind of hear back or get approved. I don't know if they thought I was really dodgy or something, but I just never heard back, and I think I did it at a point when it was kind of oversubscribed anyway. But I am trying out Blue Sky on my own personal social media, and seeing kind of if I post the same sort of content from Twitter onto Blue Sky, what kind of responses I get, thinking about, oh, have my Twitter audiences and my Twitter followers migrated over? So at the moment, I'm just the sort of I'm trying it out on my own social media, seeing the kind of responses, seeing who's on there, because obviously, we want to make sure that we're using the social media platforms that our audiences and followers are on. So that is currently a conversation that I'm having and kind of testing out. I would like to move Hampshire Archives Trust to Blue Sky, but I'm just kind of testing it with my own social media and also seeing kind of what organizations are moving over, what they're doing, and if their audience, their local history or family history audiences are migrating over as well. We are a trust that works on and promotes Hampshire archives, but I should say, there's other local history societies that follow us or family historians, because again, with what we were talking about before, thinking about skill sets, I do try to sometimes think with the kind of Monday motivation top tips. Some are Hampshire specific, but actually, how can I engage with other people who maybe aren't working in Hampshire, but I can still engage with them because I want to grow those platforms and grow our engagement. So yeah, it's just a thing in the making.
Very good. I've got a couple. I think I've got time for one more question. This one from Eleanor Baker. She asks, how do you work out your priorities for which community and groups to direct your engagement towards? Is this determined as part of organizational conversations and meetings, or are you given more freedom on a request basis?
That's a really good question. I guess it's a mix of both. Like I should say, I have a lot of freedom in what I do. I regularly ask, what are people interested in? What's currently going on? What interesting projects are there to kind of determine what I post what I post on the website in terms of kind of blogs and podcasts. But a lot of the time, actually, if we've given out grants and people are working on interesting projects, people who are working on the grants will provide blog posts. They're always really kind of keen to share what they're doing, or if we've got particular projects going on. Obviously, and we're developing partnerships. Obviously, what comes out of that partnership, that's also a priority to share. So I guess, yeah, it's a little mix of both of what, the officers and trustees maybe have been working on that they want me to kind of post about, obviously all Hampshire related and obviously people that we're working with, but I do kind of have that freedom to see what other people are posting on, see kind of what's trending, what's been of interest, and kind of keeping myself up to date with projects that I see people engaging with. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of a mix. And as I said, with a kind of, I've done this with the webinar series. I suppose I haven't done it as much of a kind of blog and podcast, but it is one thing to think about, is having those surveys. So seeing what our members are thinking about, what they like, and very much, giving their voices and their opinions importance.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of time, so although there are other questions in the chat which you might be able to answer in the chat. I think we should move on to our next speaker. Thank you again, Daniela. That was really interesting.
Thank you, James.
So our next speaker is Mia Ridge, who is the British Library's digital curator for Western Heritage Collections. She's currently a collaborator on the Flickr Foundation's Data Lifeboat project, which is funded by the NEH on the Digital Humanities Advancement Grant. At the British Library, she's part of the digital research team, providing advice and training on computational research, AI and machine learning, and crowdsourcing. She was co-investigator on the Living with Machines project 2018 to 23 and co-curated the Living with Machines exhibition with Leeds museums and galleries over the course of 2022 to 23. And it's on that project that Mia is presenting with her paper, Living with Machines, Crowdsourcing Transcriptions for Digitised Historical Collections of the British Industrial Revolution. Over to you, Mia.
Thanks, James, and thank you for that introduction, and to Alison and others for the opportunity to share my work with you today. I'm looking forward to questions. So I wanted to talk briefly first about what crowdsourcing is, why the British Library has been investing in it for the past couple of years, and then talk through an example from the Living with Machines project. So the definition that I've been working to since my PhD thesis is that crowdsourcing is a way of working with the public on tasks that contribute to a shared significant goal related to cultural heritage collections or knowledge via online platforms. So the fact that it's a shared goal and a significant goal are important. It's not just asking people to help you with your homework. It's doing work that has a wider benefit. And that's partly important because that's one of the key motivations for people participating. And online platforms, although there are a lot of similarities with the kinds of volunteering that people might have done in museums and libraries and archives in the past, actually going into those venues. So the results might in particular contribute to wider research questions or create metadata that will improve the discoverability of cultural heritage collections online. And one of the great things about it is that for members of the public, it's an opportunity to learn or improve skills. These days, they might include reading different hands. We know that a lot of people are kind of interested in the puzzle-like aspects of trying to read different hands and handwritten text over time, but also it can be an opportunity for people to share knowledge. And I think the previous presentation gave some indication of how that can work as well in a local history context. So I think it's really helpful to think of crowdsourcing as a form of volunteering. It has many of the same aspects. So people are following a particular interest, either in a type of collection, a field or a discipline of study, or in a location or in a particular organization. People come together. Sometimes the sociability can be very important in terms of encouraging participation and maintaining participation over time. Although unlike traditional volunteering, the idea is that it's much more convenient. So you're not bound to the opening hours and location of the venue. You can take on little tiny tasks that can be done in small moments of time, that can be done sometimes on mobile phones, usually on tablets, and most definitely on desktop computers. And in some ways, this is great because it means that volunteering is available to people during the whole of their life, and not only at times when they might be either gaining work experience or in retirement and able to have to spend more time actually volunteering in a more traditional way. So we're seeing a wider range of participants compared to today's traditional volunteering programs in cultural institutions. So technology really helps with the process, but ultimately it's all about people. The image on the left is James Murray, who is one of the most significant editors of the Oxford English Dictionary. Next to him is a sheet of paper from the OUP archives that shows how people used to contribute a word and a word in usage. As they were reading, they might come across what they thought was an early usage of a word or something that might give a hint about the roots of a word. Because the OED is a historical dictionary, so they could write in, and all the pieces of paper behind James Murray all that white stuff is pieces of paper. You can imagine the task of sorting through those, deduplicating those, ordering them. It would be quite complex, but technology has made that a lot easier for contemporary projects. And the other part of the screenshot is a transcription project that we ran using digitised historical newspapers, where we asked people to closely read the text and type in the words that best describe the machine that was being talked about. So we highlighted the word "the machine" and asked them to actually describe what that was. And I'll explain more about that later, but it's just an indication of how technology has made the process of reaching people, a sort of far more diverse range of people in more diverse locations, easier, more convenient. You can reach people in sort of very niche interests as well as sort of general interests, depending on the kind of project that you're running. So crowdsourcing at the British Library, I think, is very closely aligned with our mission to make our collections available for research, inspiration, and enjoyment. And I think it touches on all those points. But I think importantly, in terms of particularly this talk about connecting local communities with special collections, is the fact that it really lowers the barriers to participation. You don't need a reader's ticket. You don't need to feel particularly fancy. You don't need to feel confident enough to order up special materials. And because we're working with digitised collections, there's no conservation issues once the item is digitised. You don't have to worry about learning how to handle collections, white gloves, no white gloves. You don't need to have any deep expertise to feel confident about why to justify your access to these collections. And it engages many people who wouldn't otherwise have a relationship with the British Library and certainly wouldn't think of themselves as the kind of person who could contribute to either research about collections or making a contribution to data science, as I'll explain later. So the point is really that it's a dual process where we're giving opportunities for people to engage, look really deeply at collections, spend time in close contact with collections, and volunteers can really get to know parts of the collection very well through their exposure to lots of different collection items. But they're also creating metadata that can improve the discoverability of different collection items as well, because the backlog for description is such that it can be hard to find individual items without that sort of more detailed attention. So this is an example based on the playbills collection of the British Library. Some of them were digitised from microfilm. The volumes as they currently stand just really have a title and a date. There's no detailed information about which theatres are covered in a particular volume, the plays, the actors, any of the information that's available in playbills about the music, the authors, whether it's been performed here before. None of the illustrations are highlighted. So we created this crowdsourcing project called In the Spotlight. The blue circle is the actual task that we were asking people to do. So we asked them, first of all, to highlight the titles of performances and then to transcribe those titles of performances, because OCR software that can automatically transcribe text from digitized pages, really struggled with this kind of text. It has improved, it has gotten better, but it couldn't automatically determine the titles of performances because the biggest text isn't necessarily the actual title of a performance. And here someone has actually erroneously highlighted a scene or an act within a play and not the actual title of a performance. But you can see even just the number of typefaces and the graphic devices and even like the halftone quality of the page, that it's difficult for software to process this kind of work. So we asked people to help identify and transcribe titles, but we also provided lots of ways into the collections. So people could download all the data that had been created on the project. They could discuss particular items on a project forum. They could add a tag as they transcribed a sheet. So we knew that, for example, PhD students were looking at the site to identify particular themes. So it might be people who are looking for plays that were marked as being the first time here, or plays around particular themes like circuses, fetes, fairs, whatever it was that people were interested in researching, or they were looking for ancestors in some of these playbills. So they could tag a sheet as they went so they could come back and find it and use it as part of their research. There was also an option to, if they'd seen something interesting, they could add a note, and quite a lot of people used that. And those notes would come into our inbox, and we'd sort of check it periodically and often share back on social media what people had noticed, the questions that they asked, just to encourage that dialogue, and also to show that we were taking seriously the questions and the comments that people made. And they really did open up many new lines of inquiry about those collections, and they also provided lots of ways in for people in following that curiosity. We also had options that you could share an individual playbill, you could view it back in the main catalogue of the library, you could download the image that you were looking at, and you could get more information from the metadata from the volume about that item. So we were asking people to do a task, but we were also trying to give back in lots of ways as we did this work. So that was a kind of a way of really consciously designing for engagement as well as productivity. And to go deeper into a more recent case study, and we are actually on Mastodon for the person who was asking about that. I haven't set up an account for this on Blue Sky because Blue Sky wasn't open when the project was still live. And we found a reasonable level of engagement on Mastodon, although it is a tricky thing to get people started with. So broadly, the project was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and UKRI. We worked with the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's Data Science and AI Institute, as well as various partner universities. And the idea was that we were using new technologies to study the impact of technology on ordinary lives in the long 19th century. So particularly looking at the effect of mechanization, which we think had many parallels with the effects of AI as we've come to see it now. And it was based in part on our awareness that machine learning and AI were going to be very important aspects of ordinary life, and also how libraries use their collections and shared our collections with researchers. So we began planning it back in about 2017. And then just before the project ended last year, when ChatGPT and DALL-E launched, sort of everyone really got to thinking about AI. So in some ways we were ahead of our time, but also it's meant that we had a lot of lessons in place by the time that AI was really having an impact in this sector. So why were we doing crowdsourcing living with machines? Like, why is a data science project that's really cutting edge doing crowdsourcing? One really important aspect for us was the opportunity to engage the public with our research questions as we went. So we weren't sort of producing a big report at the end, but we were inviting people to observe our processes through participation. And it also gave us an opportunity to think about how to adapt crowdsourcing for new forms of research. So Living with Machines was very consciously a collaborative project, sort of digital history and data science, or digital humanities and data science and AI, which have very different modes of design than designing crowdsourcing for use in museums and libraries and archives, where perhaps it's not so time pressured. The formats of the data that you're producing are different, the uses of that data are different. And as machine learning and AI have been becoming more capable of certainly things like text transcription, handwritten transcription, we really wanted to think about how to build these systems so that they took into account library values. So it's not just that people are fitting into the systems, but the systems are designed to optimize human curiosity, human enjoyment, human value, as well as being productive. So again, going to that sense of like the different values in operation through these systems. And the screenshot here is an early example of a transcription project where we were asking people again about the type of machine. So we began with asking people to look at stories about industrial accidents or accidents involving machinery in the home as well as in the workplace. And that was partly built on public interest in digitised historical newspaper texts. And we know from people who worked at Colindale, the old newspaper site, that people who'd come in to do research with newspapers would often be distracted by the other stories in the newspapers. There's such rich sources of human interest stories, of local voices, of, to an extent, the voices of ordinary people, as well as more sort of authoritative, influential voices. So we got people, volunteers involved in transcription and the annotation, in part to create data sets for research and for analysis, but also the conversations that we had with people on the platform fed into my thinking about the narratives and the exhibition's themes. And we visualized some of the results of our crowdsourcing projects in the gallery for the exhibition. But it also provided the public with opportunities to actually experience what training data meant, how data science processes work, because all AI, machine learning, data science is ultimately based on some form of training material. It might be what they call unsupervised, where the system isn't given any hints about what to look at, or supervised, where you might provide a set of images or records that have been annotated with particular values and then ask it to look for others with that same kind of value. So if we're creating data sets of articles about accidents involving machinery, people were helping create those data sets, and they were understanding the choices that you make in these processes, how they work. And the bit.ly link will take you to the Zooniverse page where you can see those in operation. We use the Zooniverse site because it has a huge number of online volunteers. It's free to use the project builder. So it had a lot of advantages in terms of convenience and also reaching lots of people. So this was our first exercise where we asked people to identify whether or not there was actually an accident, because a keyword search can throw up lots of false positives. And the questions that we had during this task and that engagement and conversations, apart from people who sort of had a fascination for that perspective on how industrial accidents or accidents involving machinery could be, particularly before a National Health Service and before modern medicine. And later, a few months later, as we got into the pandemic, I think people particularly enjoyed that sense of things have been bad, but people have come through it. So all our crowdsourcing projects had a huge uptake in the number of people volunteering when everyone was stuck at home and feeling in need of distraction. But through this and through the questions that people asked from their close reading of these articles, we got into questions about, well, what actually was a machine in the 19th century? Because it's not what people might have expected. And this screenshot here shows a newspaper article where scaffolding is called a machine. And that was a kind of really interesting use, because we tend to think of machines as being something that moves, that has some kind of force that might be directed by steam power or electricity or some sort of non-human or animal force. But machines could also, in this reading, be static. So we took people's questions and turned them into a new task, where we asked them to read an article and describe the type of machine, so that we could build a lexicon of machine terms that we could use to further search and get better results when we're looking for different kinds of mentions of machines. So not finding examples of machines that didn't use, or articles about machines that didn't use the word machine, by having this kind of bigger lexicon of different kinds of words. And I think when we talk about some of the narratives in the exhibition being shaped by this, people's surprise at the number of machines in rural settings. So plows, all the many variations of agricultural machinery as they replaced like horses or manual labor, and assumptions about gender and age and all kinds of things that came through and helped shape the exhibition. So just to switch briefly to thinking about the impact on our volunteers, apart from our volunteers we had a couple of like super volunteers, which is common in projects, who did a lot of tasks, and they found it a bit traumatic actually reading so many accident stories. So we did encourage them to go and do another Zooniverse project for a while and look at penguins or whatever else. But I asked people, like, how has the project changed how they think about the machines in the 1800s? And people had really lovely reflections on things like, why we have a health and safety culture now, why it's important. They got the lessons about how we're making decisions as a society about how we implement and live with AI and other newer technologies. And also they thought really deeply about the way that language worked and language changed over time. And for us, that was a kind of fantastic result, because it showed that people were learning about the themes of the project, not only by reading outcomes from the project, by actually contributing themselves. And we did a survey in 2022 that we aligned with previous surveys in the field of citizen science and crowdsourcing, and also with the British Library's audience category, so that we could draw connections between those two things. And 71% of people had no previous relationship with the British Library. So we reached over 5,500 volunteers overall in the Living with Machines project on Zooniverse. So that's a lot of people who never had a relationship with the British Library, and some of them in particular came in because they were interested in the data science and stayed because they got interested in the history. So there weren't people who ever thought of themselves as having an interest in history, but in seeing history, primary sources at first hand, they developed that interest. So most people came in because they had an interest in the historical theme or topic. They wanted to help. They liked the idea of contributing to research. And also they stayed for opportunities to learn and because it can be fun and quite enjoyable. And some people, even Kirby was one of our very prolific volunteers, came up with all these fantastic ideas for research that we could do further, based on their really strong knowledge of the sources that we were asking them to look at. And that, again, was a really fantastic example because he was, I think, a biologist by training. So he brought a very sort of research mindset to things, but the way that he started to think about how we could use newspapers as historical sources to answer bigger questions was a really sort of fantastic. It's the kind of thing that you dream of happening when you do this kind of work. So just to close with some future challenges, we're currently doing a survey on thinking about where data goes after a crowdsourced project, and that's partly based on the previous history of museums and libraries and archives doing work with community collections and people commenting on collections, sharing their own personal memories of collections from different countries or collections from local history, and knowing that that information, which is incredibly rich and powerful and valuable, might not have ever ended up in a collections management system. So we're interested in the barriers that people have faced in taking in data from the community or records enhanced by the community, and looking ahead to machine learning and AI, knowing that those barriers are likely to stay there. So we're just working on that research at the moment. The survey closes on Tuesday. And I think the biggest challenge for us is that machines can do a lot of the work that we used to ask people to do. So what does that mean for those opportunities to explore collections, engage with collections, low barriers to looking at collections up close and having really privileged access if software can do the transcription and many of the other tasks that we currently ask people to do. So I'll stop there and say thank you for listening, and I'd be glad to hear of any questions.
Thank you very much, Mia. That was really interesting. Transcription and crowdsourcing have been around for a while, and I thought you hit the nail right on the head where, and I'm guilty of this, sort of the tendency to think of them as subcontracting out your homework to people. And actually, I think what you demonstrated in your paper was that it's much more about providing a way into the collections for people, and that being a springboard to further conversations. And I thought that was quite interesting, that the topics that caught the eye of people who volunteered could give you a sense of what it was in the collections people were drawn to, what might be the basis for future projects or funding bids that could build on a pre-existing collaboration. I thought that was, transcription projects as intelligence gathering. I hadn't really thought of that. So that's that's an interesting insight. If I can start the questions, I'm thinking as a medievalist, do you have any sort of suggestions for transcription projects where the materials aren't quite so amenable to public engagement? You know, the barriers to entry with something written in 15th century secretary hand is quite higher than digitized newspapers. Do you have any sort of suggestions for the struggling medievalists among us who have ambitions to do transcription projects of our own?
Yeah, I mean, there are some, and they have been quite successful. There was a project called Marine Lives, which was a sort of organized volunteer project by a man called Colin Greenstreet. But I think the Parker Library had one medieval transcription project.
Mhm.
One thing that's worth thinking about is there are a lot of people who studied history as undergraduates, who then went on to get jobs outside of academia. So there's a significant proportion of the population who has some experience. And there are projects that have done things like set up tutorials, or educated people on how to read a hand. And I think with things like machine learning and AI, it should be possible to design systems that teach people at the same time and sort of validate what they're learning and check the results of what they're transcribing and encourage them to kind of improve or deepen their skills. And another tricky question is also about ways of doing student assignments where they're contributing to transcriptions of material that hasn't been done yet. And in some ways that's fantastic because students are making a real contribution that will always exist for other readers of that material. But also the ethics of doing material where if it's a class assignment, they don't really have a choice about participating. But I think that sense of you're doing an assignment that also will forever have that value of having transcribed material can be really important. And people use things like the Zooniverse platform internally. So not every project on Zooniverse goes officially live or goes live to the public. A lot of people use it because it's a system that lets you manage the media that people are working on, the different transcriptions. And Zooniverse have a tool called Alice now that is quite good for handwritten text processing. It manages the different versions of transcriptions that you might get coming in from people. There's a tool called From the Page as well that is a collaborative manuscript transcription tool. So you can see what someone else has transcribed and maybe you can improve a couple of letters here and there. And then, of course, there's Transcribus, which a lot of people are using to train. They might give it sample pages of a particular hand and transcriptions from them and then develop a model from there. So there's lots of options now. It's a quite exciting time to be thinking about handwritten text in manuscripts and archives.
Certainly. No, I absolutely agree. And I like that there are audiences out there who, as you say, don't think of themselves as library researchers, but who have never, they were, but they didn't think of themselves in that way. And your project has given them a kind of way into to engaging with the materials. I think about my own parents complaining, "Oh, we're just stuck at home. We never go anywhere. We never do anything." Maybe I should send them in your direction and get them
Yeah, there are
get them
so many
involved.
transcription projects on Zooniverse, and it's a fantastic way for older people to keep their brains engaged. And there's a level of sociability that can happen on some projects as well. So it's a really important option for people who have fantastic handwritten text skills.
Are there any questions from the audience? Well, there's a question in the Q&A. So Anne Ramon has asked, her Family History Society have transcribed some records and burial register entries online, and they've been working in pairs in breakout rooms, and they're hoping to do another project. They're interested in anything kind of closely aligned to family history and their society geographical area. She asks, who can she contact?
Oh, that's a great question. I think if there's a local archive or records office, it would definitely be worth asking them if they have any ideas. And they might be happy for you to photograph pages to share out for transcription. And again, you can use most of these platforms for free for small projects. And then the ones that I mentioned, Zooniverse and From the Page and Transcribus, you can export the records. What a local archive or records office does with them can be tricky because it depends on the system that you use. But at least, even if they're just stored in Word documents or plain text attached to records, that can be useful. So I guess I'd talk to people who have records that would be of interest and maybe offer your societies help with transcribing some of those records.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah, speak to the archivists.
Do we have projects? Unfortunately, at the moment, the BL is still recovering from the ransomware attack in October, and we don't have any current projects.
Okay. unless there's any final questions, I can't see any in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm just looking at the time. Mia, thank you again for that presentation. It was really interesting and showed a different way of approaching transcription tasks and really engaging people's interests and doing so in an open-ended rather than overly directive way. I like that balance. So there's a break now for 20 minutes until past. So we'll turn off our microphones and cameras. We'll leave the session running, and then we'll start again at 3:30 with our third paper of the afternoon. Are we ready for the second half? Okay. So our third speaker is Michelle Castelletti. She is part of the Oxford Festival of the Arts. Following her first doctorate in music in 2013, she has expanded her studies into the liberal arts, architectural history, literature, and the visual arts, reading for a Master of Studies in different subjects. She's currently engaged in further doctoral research, not one doctorate, but two, goodness, specializing in medieval history, specifically the meaning of light and its creation and use in devotional practice in late medieval England, as seen through the interrelationship between ecclesiastical architectural space, liturgical rite, and the senses. She's particularly interested in material culture and medieval ecclesiastical objects, whether that's the architecture itself or the splendour of illuminated manuscripts. And her latest paper was on the Sherborne Missal. She loves teaching and being an alumna and current graduate of New College, Oxford, and is director of the Oxford Festival of the Arts, where she focuses on artistic integrity and excellence within a framework that enables sustainability and encourages and creates growth through the wonderful encounter between academia and creativity, and through widening participation and public engagement. Her talk this afternoon is the Oxford Festival of the Arts, engaging events for local communities and special collections. Michelle, over to you if you'd like to share your slides.
Thank you very much, James. Can you all see it?
Yes, it's going to be
brilliant. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Alison for inviting me to do this. I enjoyed very much the previous presentations. This is going to be slightly different because my way of engaging with the public is trying to, I'm an interdisciplinarian, so it's trying to bring different things together to try and hit as many different interests as possible, and thereby getting people to see collections and to engage with what we have in our archives and our libraries and our galleries and things like that. So, so that is what I try to do, and that is what it's going to be about today. So I actually think that we are very lucky, and we sometimes forget that ourselves, and we fail to see that our ordinary is actually extraordinary. And this is what I feel we should be doing. We should be sharing this with everybody, and I really feel it is our duty with a capital D to do so. So I think that we should try to find ways and means to engage with children, with adults, with families, with people with different interests, and find different ways to try and engage the public who are not always on our terms, because I think sometimes especially when we have a venue or when we have a space or when we have a collection, we are already many times expecting the person to come to us. So I believe we should try and meet people halfway or even beyond halfway to try and make everybody feel like, yes, of course we can try this out because it's slightly different, or because it is sort of sparking some kind of curiosity. I find it also surprising how invigorating it is for me too, because as a curator or director, because I always learn new things in the process, and I find that quite special. So this is what I see. This is what I think I see anyway. I believe that there's a connection in everything that we look at, be it historical, artistic, political, social, paleographical, codicological. There are so many ways in which we can see things and so many layers to some things. So I think what we must do is simply find the layers, or that's what I do at least, simply find the layers and links to pursue them, or carry out, as some people have already said previously in the talks, carry out community projects to help find the links that the community is interested in. And I really believe that contextualization is crucial. So our collections and manuscripts and artifacts are an extraordinary source. We are surrounded by this all the time, but perhaps we sometimes forget the architecture itself. And I love architecture. Because we are in Manchester, and because this week was the anniversary of our friend the Bard, I thought I would start by sharing a walkthrough installation I curated at the marvelous John Rylands Library in Manchester for Shakespeare's 400th anniversary as part of the Manchester After Hours, with the original manuscripts, including his original first folio, at the center of my curation when I was the artistic director of the Royal Northern College of Music. So I'm going to try and link this, and I hope you can hear. If you don't, please tell me.
Nothing is coming through, Michelle, I'm afraid.
There's nothing coming through.
No, we're still on that same slide.
If I do this, is something coming through here now?
Yes.
There we go. Did it work?
Yes, it did.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's a project that I did at the John Rylands Library in Manchester. And I believe that if we try to pursue things in this way, we will also capture people with very different interests. So not everybody was there because of the first folio, although I think they should have been, but a lot of people were there because it was something different and because they were curious about what they're going to be experiencing. So I think that is something that, at least with my curator hat on, that is what I try to do with all the collections that I work with. Not everybody is the same. I don't know if anybody has tried audience segmentation. I'm sure many in the audience have. I have to admit I was a bit skeptical about this in the beginning. And somebody, I think in the first presentation, somebody asked about audiences and how do you decide. Well, I have done a couple of these audience segmentation assessments of audiences in different places. And actually, even though I was skeptical in the beginning, it does work. It works in the sense that it works as, it depends on how you use it, but at least it gives you an idea of the different people out there, or the potential audience out there, and how you can engage with them in different ways. Because each person is usually, whether one knows it or not, is usually part of a segment on society. And you can then target each segment in very many different ways. And I try to use it wherever I am, and in that way, I can curate things differently, but I can also target the marketing differently, and it helps me reach many different people. So I believe this is what we want to achieve. So this is another project that I was doing with color, actually, and sort of it wasn't illuminated manuscripts as such, but it was showing manuscripts, and you can see how excited these children were. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to enchant children. We want to excite youth. We want to speak to adults. I think curiosity, enrichment, and the want. I don't think anything is more beautiful than seeing this kind of reaction from the faces of these children. So how do I do this? I'm sure all of us here have different ways of doing it. I listen, I question, and I listen again. And I listen to what the research tells me, to where it is leading me, to the space itself, to the people in the space, the people outside of the space, very importantly. And I believe that there is nothing stronger than the power of partnership. And it just makes everything so much more wonderful to work together. So this is a project that I was doing, but it's how I work. And I believe that you have to have the infrastructure before you create something. So partnerships, and as I said before, unlike many of you here, I guess, I am not a director or curator of a particular library or museum. So I'm therefore kind of a traveling curator, a minstrel curator kind of thing, who creates ties and links and tries to understand what the other party wishes to do, the collections of the city, of the library, of the archive. And it's about storytelling, but for me, it's about creating beautiful relationships with other people so that all the stakeholders, the festival, the gallery, the museum, the library, the venue, and at the center of it all, of course, the major stakeholder is the public itself, so that everybody is happy and that we can create something that everybody is interested in. These are just some shots of different spaces. The glass is the touring glass for the centenary of the glass master painters in Yorkshire, who I was working with, and I brought to Oxford. But around them, I created lots of events so that we can interpret the exhibition in very many different ways. At the center, you can see one of the exquisite Wolsey manuscripts, the Cardinal Wolsey Gospel Lectionary. That's the one that is at Magdalen at MS/223. And if you haven't seen it, I would suggest you come to Oxford to see it in real life. And there's its sister manuscript is at Christchurch, but we are talking about digital engagement, and it is very beautifully digitized, and it's so beautiful to turn the pages. So talking about manuscripts and about digitization, not that I want to remind us all of the pandemic, but of course, during the pandemic, we all have to find creative ways of doing this. I did have a couple of short video clips. I do have them, they're here, but I'm thinking because of the fact that the other one was a little bit slow, I'm going to skip showing the video. But what I was trying to do during the pandemic is pair and match the architecture with the collection. So every time I was doing something, I was creating bespoke video so that it's not just, well, I don't mean just about the manuscript, but it's not only about the manuscript, it's about where it is held as well. So in this case, this manuscript they're called the Lila Dam manuscripts. They're in the St. John's Cathedral in Malta, and their dates 1533. But its architectural setting is just as exquisite as the manuscript itself, and it is this. So it is beautiful to be able to show the people, the illumination. You can see the gilding on the walls, but you can see it in the book as well. And if I could have shown you the video, you'd have seen how they actually match so beautifully. And I think when we find these type of links, we manage to get hold of people's curiosity and interest, and actually sort of almost awe of the splendor even more. These are some of the projects that we are doing this year. I always try to work with the Bodleian Libraries. I think we are just incredibly lucky in Oxford to have so many beautiful archives. And I have to say, I feel like I have the best friend in Dr. Andrew Dunning, who's always so willing whenever I go to speak to him. And of course, my college is New College. So I have a nice relationship there too. So these are a couple of examples we're doing this year. This was last year in different colleges as well. And there's Magdalen there, who's kind of my next door neighbor, if you like. And there's Weston. And this was the year before. And this was even more interesting in a way, because what I did was, we were talking about community and audiences. And what I did was, apart from the sort of intellectual side of things, where I had Michelle Brown and I had Andrew Dunning again. But I also asked Patricia Lovett to do a whole day illuminated workshop for us, so that we could also have the practical side of things, and people could have a go at trying to create an illumination themselves. I couldn't put as many of the photos as I wanted. But here's an example of some of the exhibitions that we had. I do believe it's about trust and people trusting you and coming, and they always seem to come in droves when we have things. Talking about Patricia Lovett. So as I said, we created a practical workshop based on the collection. I didn't want to, this is not a great example, but I didn't want to show somebody else's work. This is actually my very, very failed attempt of creating an illumination. But it's just to show what was possible in a few hours with Patricia, which is lovely. So this year, for example, what I'm doing with the archives is trying to do it in a different way, combining the archives with live performance in the library. So we're going to go to Magdalen College in the old library, and they have a rare first edition of John Dowland's printed music, and we're going to have kind of table performances for the people to be able to sort of see the manuscript, see other things that are linked to it, but also hear historically informed performance within the library itself, which is quite a special way of experiencing a collection, I think. This is again another different way of doing it. I spoke about how much I love architecture in the beginning, and this year is the 550th anniversary of the foundation stone of the chapel at Magdalen. So it was wonderful for me to sort of research that and see how I could find the evidence for it, and then work out how we can even make it even more historically, but also through music, and show different ways of celebrating this with the music of the time, or talks about things that relate to it. This is a completely different thing, again in Manchester, actually, funnily enough. So this is at the Imperial War Museum North, and it is a very strong link with the architecture again. I had Daniel Liebeskin's very unsettling, disorientating architecture to work with, together with diaries and letters of the soldiers in the First World War, alongside all the artifacts of the museum. So I had the space for a whole weekend to create. Well, basically, they gave me carte blanche to do what I wanted with it, which is wonderful. So I could even project on the walls, and I had dancers, musicians, poets, writers, people who went through the diaries, and we created a children's opera out of it, and an whole installation. There were over 300 people involved at least, but it really worked, and it also won the Times High Award for Excellence and Innovation in the Arts. So I was very proud of it at the time. An even bolder attempt. Again, I'm not going to try and show it to you because I'm afraid it might sort of stop the transmission. But this was working with the Ashmolean Museum here in Oxford, and I commissioned a dance video. Again, it was during the pandemic. So that is why I was trying to find different ways and means of engaging the audience in a way that is not just somebody speaking to them on a screen, because I think we wanted something different at the time, or we needed something different at the time. And if I would show it to you, it's quite different, because the dancers actually seem to be dancing in midair, not attached to anything. So it created quite a lot of conversation here. But turning back to our audiences and how to reach them. Fundamentally, I believe it's about getting to knowing the audience, or getting to know one's potential audience, and importantly, gaining trust and a respectful relationship. I love the excitement of our followers when we announce what's next, and this is what I aim to grow through stronger links, through stronger programming, through more engagement, and through something very distinctive. But I think in order to do that, you have to ask yourself many questions all the time. So even from even before, what happens before a visit? What do you think people are thinking before they come? How can we reach them? Linking back to the audience segmentation I spoke about before. What are our audiences? Who are they? What do we think they think? What do we think they might like? It's what do we think they want to get from a visit? So it's all about trying to understand the potential audience out there. Again, it's always about arts engagement for me, and it's also about welcoming spaces, respectful relationships, a very good business model, analysis for improvement, and of course, relevant programming. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this, so I've skipped a couple of slides because it was done wonderfully in the first presentation. But of course, social media is a massive tool for us all. And I was just surprised. This is a bit outdated because this was done in 2021 when I was working with somebody. But I was very surprised at the massive leap that there has been in the last sort of 10, 12 years or so in people using social media across all generations. So you can see from the bottom, from these graphs, in 2012 it was 78% of people, which is still a lot, I think. But in 2021 it was 90%, and I'm sure that has grown even more nowadays. So all of the social media platforms that are out there, I'm not a fan of all of them personally, but I do think that they help enormously. We went out with an event, for example, just on our mailing newsletter, which is a different type of thing. Yes, but I go out on Friday, and by Monday I already sort of have half the place sold out. And it seems to happen every time. And I believe that is because of a beautiful relationship that we have established with our audience. And finally, I just thought I'll leave you with something that I loved doing, and this is the British Museum. And I think we should always try to do the unexpected in a very beautiful way. So I shall stop sharing my screen, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very varied activities there in a number of different spaces and using a really diverse selection of special collections. I thought it was an interesting point that you made, that you have to know your audience, research the communities and create a partnership in order for these sorts of events to be successful. Do you have any reflections on what the main barriers to that kind of participation or that partnership might be? How do people or communities perceive libraries and archives that hold special collections? How do they think of us? What are their preconceptions, and what strategies might we adopt to challenge or reassure or encourage people?
Yeah, the last two verbs are better, to encourage and to sort of make people feel that this is also theirs. So in Oxford, of course, we are very, very lucky in Oxford because we have huge resources, wonderful collections. But it is also, unfortunately, we have what is still called as the town and gown syndrome. So some people think that those places are not for them. What I believe we must do all the time is go to the people, and that is why I try to do a variety of things that not always necessitates the person to come to you, because then I think when you engage with somebody and they feel, oh, actually I really enjoyed that, or I learned something new, or oh, I didn't know I could go into that place. That is why I do lots of things like that, because of me, as in through the festival, then the doors are open and you don't need your bot card to go in. So all of a sudden the person feels like they don't only live in the city, but they actually are part of the city and they can go in. And I think that's the first barrier that we need to sort of dissolve. The other thing is I actually go to the communities. I speak to the people. I see what would you like? What would you like? I sometimes do community projects that are related to the exhibition or to whatever it is that I'm doing, to try and find ways and means to engage with them in a way that is on their own terms rather than on my terms. So yeah, I think it's also a beautiful thing. I just love doing it. But I do think that we must be aware that what for us is normal is not necessarily normal for everybody.
No, I think that's a very good point. Surrounded by medieval manuscripts every day at work, even though I don't get as much time to catalogue and study them as I might like, you do get blasé that this stuff is just on the shelves and it's always there within reach, and that is not the case for the majority of people that you're trying to engage with. I think it's a good reminder. I've got a question from Eleanor Baker in the chat. She asks, if you don't mind her asking, how does the funding work for these large-scale events in different spaces? Is it reliant on ticket sales, grants that individuals or institutions have, or grants awarded to the events themselves?
Okay, so it's a mixture of everything. I try to, as much as I can, almost always, I would say, I don't like charging people when it's about public engagement for me, because I think that defeats the purpose, because one of the main things is access, isn't it? And if we want people to sort of give it a shot, you don't want them to give it a shot and pay £20 for the privilege of giving it a shot, So I want to remove that. That's the initial barrier that I try to remove. And in order to do that, I do have to work on fundraising, and I do have to work on bringing partners on board and doing things in very many ways. I would say that if one is working with another collection, usually there are many things that both institutions give in kind, as in I would give in kind and they would give in kind. So there are certain things that sort of cancel each other out that way. But there has to be an element of support from the public. So, for example, I have a patron who supports the youth. So every time I have something for the youth, he will support, I mean, not fully, but he will support partially what that is. And sometimes in other projects, it is a properly funded thing with different sponsors doing something. And other times I know that's, so my program, Hot Off the Press, has just arrived. So I will have things that are not necessarily public engagement, but a beautiful concert with the cello concert or an orchestra, and I think that the money from that will then subsidize something else that I want to do for free for the public. But I believe that we must, I really believe this, I think we must have the spaces available, any exhibition as much as possible for the public without causing that barrier. Sometimes I have to, but what I do is I put in the program, if you'd like to come and you are in financial difficulty, please contact the festival. And I will always find a way to help people come.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? We're running a little bit ahead of time, but Michelle, if you're happy for us to move on to the next presentation, absolutely. If people have more questions to ask, they can put them in the chat for you to answer, or possibly come back to at the end. Thanks again for your presentation. It's very interesting. And so our final speaker, speaking with Oxford, is Helen Cook of the Bodleian Libraries. And she's going to be speaking to us about similar subjects in a way, encouraging local community groups to visit the Bodleian Libraries. How do you get them across the threshold? Over to you, Helen.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully that's it. Thank you very much, James, and thank you, Michelle, for kind of setting the big picture, which is very much what we're trying to achieve also at the Bodleian, but obviously on a much smaller scale. I don't come from an archive and manuscript professional background. I come from a public engagement specialist background, so I'm really hoping today to give you some very practical ideas of how we work with different audiences and how we try and bring people to the Bodleian, and some of the constraints that we have to work within. And when I'm thinking of local community groups, I'm actually thinking of a very broad sense of visitors to the site. So they could be day visitors, they could be tourists, they could be residents of the city. And I'm also thinking about how we can connect with them on many different levels. So I will try this afternoon to give you examples of the different connections that we try to make, some much deeper than others, but all of them leading to a view of helping people to know what we have and enjoy what we have. So the Bodleian Public Engagement team is based in the Western Library, which together with the Old Library hold the special collections of the Bodleian Libraries. I'm sure you know that the libraries as a whole, there are 26 different libraries across the city, but we are based in this space. And this is the space that we have to work in. So we're a small team of 4 people, and my role is very much working with adults and community groups and volunteers. And I have colleagues who work with schools and families, so I won't be talking about that today. But all the work that we do is very much rooted in the collections that we have and the exhibitions that we have, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So we have a huge range of things to choose from and to talk about. And so how we start that, I'll try and address how we kind of use that collection with our particular audiences. So there are some opportunities and challenges that we face, and I just want to give you a little bit of context to the work that we do, just to explain why we approach audiences and why we use different formats in our work because of some of these challenges that we face. So a lot of the work I do is actually grounded in the exhibitions that we have here at the Western Library, usually 2 exhibitions per year and a number of small displays. And that's really a kind of window into our special collections for non-library readers. So obviously the bulk of people who come here are researchers and readers, but we're working very much with non-specialists and the general public. And so an exhibition is a good way to invite them into the space. And those exhibitions come from proposals from colleagues either within the university, within the Bodleian Libraries themselves, or from other institutions, or from non-academics, and they're put forward through a committee. And so the content can be extremely varied. They could be marking an anniversary, they could be the culmination of a research project, they could be celebrating a new acquisition. And that means that there's a huge variety of things that are on show, but also when I'm working with the same groups over a cycle, then there's actually new things that we can show them in the spaces. And it just means that there's always inspiration and variety to share. It does mean that people's contact with the original material is kind of through glass, it's quite limited, but we can reach an awful lot of people through our exhibitions. And there is more bespoke work that we do as well, where visitors can get more up close with the manuscripts. We don't always have a choice as the public engagement team as to what we're working with, so what the exhibitions are. So we have to be quite imaginative and creative with the collections that are on show, but that's always an enjoyable challenge. We also work very, very closely with curatorial colleagues, and they're fantastic here in the Western and very open to public engagement work. So we're delighted to have colleagues that will help us share these collections with the public. But we're also very conscious that their priority is teaching and research. And so our capacity is kind of reflects their capacity as well. The space that we have to work in is the one I showed you in the picture. So it's a very public space. It's right next to a cafe, so we can't have collections available to share with people in that space, unless the objects are within a display case. So if we want to share collections in the way that you can see in the image, we would have to book a room, and we don't have our own dedicated space to work in. I'm sure that's the same for many people. But those sorts of engagements tend to be with quite limited numbers. So we're always juggling and wanting to give people access directly to the collections and wanting to involve a larger number of people with our work. So within those kind of caveats and constraints and opportunities, that's kind of the context for the work that I'm going to share with you now. So we work with visitors in a whole range of ways, from a very kind of light touch way where they're coming into our space and seeing things, but they may not learn in depth about them, to much more direct contact. So some examples on this page of some of our larger scale public events where we try to unpack the themes of our exhibitions and collections. And these can be quite a broad brush engagements, really, but it is about getting people into the building and getting people through the door so they might think, I'll come back another time and see what else is on. So we do events in the daytime and in the evening. You can see here a selection. Top left is our zine fair. We worked with students and colleagues in other institutions in Oxford, including Oxford Brookes and the Ruskin School of Art. And it was a way to showcase the work of their students. And some of those items then went into the Bodleian collections. So it's a kind of reciprocal exchange, really, of ideas and new creative processes. And that particular event does bring in a more diverse audience to the Bodleian who otherwise probably wouldn't come through. And similarly, in raising our profile, we try and do events where we're raising awareness of the Bodleian as a whole and the work that it does. So it's not just about what happens in the Western. So we did an event last year called the A to Z of the Bodleian Libraries, where we worked with other colleagues across the libraries and across to different venues to showcase the spaces, but also the collections and the work that was done across all 26 venues. So there was something for each letter of the alphabet. So you've got I for imaging services. That's where they obviously take photographs for research and conservation and commercial use as well. So it was very important to actually show with other colleagues what we do, but to involve other colleagues in our work. It was something a bit new, which worked very well. So working in partnership, as Michelle said, is always really, really important for us. So we have done a number of bigger events with partners, including the Design of Bookbinders group, where we had a display of the competition entries, which are incredibly beautiful bound volumes, really imaginative and creative in the ways that they put the bindings together. And that was a way of making connections with professional communities who have similar skills that are on show in our collections. So we had a festival of talks and demonstrations with them. And on the bottom right, you can see an event quite recently called Chaucer Now, which was linked to our current Chaucer exhibition, where we brought together the exhibition curator, an author who's reinterpreted Chaucer's work, and a theatre company to put on a live performance with readings and Q&A. But all of that is very much grounded in the exhibition that's on show, which obviously is showcasing the collections and the research of the curator, Marion Turner. But it's about transforming our spaces. So that large open space, while it is challenging for us to use and make a versatile space, it does mean that we can do a whole range of different things. And so transforming it into a theatre production for one night was something quite different and unexpected for people. And that's kind of really key in the work that we do, that we're actually trying to do something unexpected. We're trying to do something physical, memorable, and surprising, so that people will want to come back and see what else we offer. So we did a project last year where we brought music into the library, and people obviously coming to the library, perception of libraries, you need to be very quiet and restrained, and we're trying to break that mold as much as we can. So we had a flash mob music performance, which you can see in the left, and that was part of a season to do with the anniversary of the birth of John Playford. So we had a small display of Playford's dancing masters, which brought together English country dances from the kind of the first dancing master came out in 1651, but the dancers had been around before that, and it carried on being used much later. So some of the dances you would have seen in Jane Austen and so on are from this dancing master book. So we had copies on display, we had a pocket violin, and we had steps on the floor that people could have a go while they visited the display. And then we also had a concert programme and dance workshops, and we culminated in a ball, which is the picture at the bottom right-hand corner. So something, again, people wouldn't think the Bodleian Libraries would be a place where you could go to a historical dance ball, and it brought in a whole new community for us. So the historical dance community is very strong in Oxfordshire, and they were people who wouldn't necessarily have visited the Western Library. So it brought them in, and hopefully they will come back. And we're planning to continue music. We've just had the Oxford Folk Festival where we had choirs performing in the space. So it's about having that space become very live and dynamic, so that people who come in see something different and think they want to come back and find out more. Our volunteers are really important to us in helping to create that welcome. And we have a space in the corner of Blackwell Hall in the Western Library called the Space for Reading, which is a pop-up library. And it's there for everybody to use, whether they have a reader's ticket, whether they're coming to the cafe, whether they're just poking their head around the door to see what on earth this huge building is all about. And so, again, it's part of that message that this is a space for the people of Oxford visiting Oxford. It's not just for the university. And so it's a pop-up library on a theme. The books are recommended by staff, by volunteers, by the general public, and by community groups that we work with. And then we whittle down the recommendations into a selection of about 100 books that are themed. And inside each book, we put the story of the person who recommended it, why they chose it. So we ask them to fill in a card. We stick that inside the book, so that when you're coming to browse in this library, you can find out the stories of all these books, why people chose this particular book. And often the space reading is linked to the theme of the exhibition. So you can see on the left, this was our Chaucer exhibition. So all the books are about journeys, but a very open-ended interpretation of that, so that we've got mental journeys, emotional journeys, as well as physical journeys as well. And hopefully people come and they use the space, they can browse, they don't have to read the books, but we encourage them to. And then they might come back and come to an event that's in the library because they've seen some promotion for it, or they might then join a group that meets in that space. And it is a way of very gently enabling them to have more encounters with the collections. And we have a team of volunteers that support the space. So they sit in the space, they observe how people are using the space, they welcome people, they help us to monitor how many people use it. And they're also, most importantly, our advocates for the public engagement work that we do, so that they can encourage people to come back and to tell other people about it. And we've also tried to enhance our work with volunteers in other ways. So within Blackwell Hall, so we've got the exhibitions. So we have trained a team of volunteers to do exhibition tours, and that means we can reach far more people than if we ask the curator to do it. So he has many other things to do. We have a printing press in Blackwell Hall, so we run keepsake printing sessions with the volunteers that we've trained up, and that can just be printing something, a card or an image that relates to what's happening in the exhibitions or is something from the collections. People are always curious about the press, so if you have someone there setting something up, people will always go and have a look and have a go. And it's a very light touch way of engaging them, but again gives them a memorable, enjoyable experience that hopefully will encourage them to come back. And we also run tapestry talks. So within the Western Library, there's a huge 16th century tapestry map on the wall of Oxfordshire. It's one of 4. And we've trained up volunteers to deliver short talks about the tapestry map, and anyone that happens to be in the hall can go along and listen. So, and they often, the volunteers go and do their own research as well. So they're adding to our collections knowledge by being involved with us. And all of this work enables us to reach far more people and to increase our capacity, which we couldn't do without them at all. So their support for us and they're our ambassadors for our work. It's really, really vital. So that's kind of a lot of the light touch ways that we try and share our collections with people and encourage them to know a little bit about what we do and what we have. And then we will have other ways where we try to deepen their understanding. So it's about offering depth as well as breadth. And so some of the themes and techniques that you might see in an exhibition, we would try and go a little bit deeper with some of our smaller groups, either who the public can join, or we can work in a more targeted way, which I'll come on to. So we will involve academics and researchers in some of those activities. So what you can see, we do workshops on lots of different things. We did a photography workshop using plants and natural materials as developing agents, so people could take their own photographs. And this was to accompany an exhibition on the history of photography. And we worked with modern artists who were using these early techniques themselves, and then they taught people who booked onto the workshops. Again, all within that very large open space, so that people who are happening to come into the cafe or come and have a look at the exhibitions, they can see what's happening, they can come over, they can have a chat, and it's a way of reaching even more people. We do something called the Living Library at some of our events, which some of you may know, where academics who have researched a particular theme that links to an exhibition will come along and be a living library book, so that the public can come and borrow them and sit and chat with them for a few minutes about their work or anything else that they need to ask them, really. And it's very popular. It's often within a much larger event, the conversation can sort of go anywhere, and people really like being able to meet the experts and being able to talk to them about their work and kind of get a deep dive into an aspect of an exhibition or a particular author or historical figure. And then, like many of you, I'm sure we do a talks and webinar program, and that means we can share the collections again in a more direct way. In the webinars in particular, we show items under the visualizer, so people can see them much more closely than they would even if they were in the room with an item. So those are always really popular. Picture on the bottom right was Alison doing a fantastic webinar recently on Thomas Becket and Canterbury and Chaucer's Pilgrims, together with Dr. Andrew Dunning. And that was really popular. It's very informal. All our events are aimed at non-specialists. So the idea is that it's very conversational and very accessible for people. And that is a way of us also going beyond our doors and reaching people overseas. So for that one particularly, we have people from all over the world joining, from India and South America and so on. So it's a kind of window again into the collections, particularly for people who would really struggle to be in Bodleian in person. And then we also are very keen that the more targeted work we do is about improving access to the collections in the broadest sense. So we work with particular community groups with needs or particular needs that we want them to be able to access the collections as much as someone else who's walking through the door. So we've done more targeted work with adults with sight loss, and so we do regular tours for adults with visual impairment, audio description tours of the exhibitions, so with the curator and a colleague who is very familiar with for leading audio description tours. And we will provide additional resources. So you can see there an example of a manuscript that's been printed on swell paper. So you can raise the edges of some of the features of it, and people can feel what is being described. That's the manuscript that's on show. We also consulted with a particular group on exhibition design when we had our Sensational Books exhibition. So this was about how books are multisensory objects. So we worked with adults with sight loss to think about the colour contrast and the sort of layout of the exhibition, and to make sure that it was accessible to them as far as possible. And the exhibition also explored touch, so it had touch panels, it had sound installations as well. So the idea was that people could really explore how we engage with books with all our senses. And it had smell nebulizers, so it had the smell of the first folio in the Magna Carta, for example, and a book made of cheese, which is the one thing everyone remembers from that exhibition. So we try and consult and work with groups as much as possible to feed into our exhibitions. And for the Space for Reading in particular, we're really trying to do a co-curation model so that the groups are choosing the designs rather than us telling them this is what it's going to be like or asking for an opinion, and it's a much more collaborative process. Meet Me at the Library is a group for older adults, some with dementia. So we did a cyanotypes workshop with them based on our photography exhibition. And they brought in items from home that were particularly meaningful to them and did a cyanotype picture based using that item. So you can see an example of that there. And for that group, I try and do something quite practical and quite creative, but very much linked to an exhibition, the exhibition that they go and see. So that's an example of a regular group where the changes in exhibitions are actually very helpful to provide new content and new ideas and new things for them to see. And we also do work with adults with learning disabilities. So small groups will come, we do small group workshops, again, making a lot of practical activities, a lot of hands-on multisensory work with them. You can see a picture there of an easy read guide that we've developed for the Westons to welcome adults with learning disabilities, but actually it has a lot of practical guidance about access to the building, which is useful for all kinds of people. I couldn't include a photo of the group work because it's a permissions issue, but we do lots of book-related craft, particularly with those groups, and they will visit the exhibition. So again, we're giving them that light touch encounter with the collections. But we do also do show and tell, so with groups where we can. So when we're working with community groups, we will often work with the curators or the librarians and get out material and enable people to get much closer to it. And we would do this much more frequently if we could, but it depends on the capacity of the room and the capacity of the curator. And so we do what we can when we can. And it's really important when we're working with particular groups that actually we're learning from them as well. So you can see here examples from on the left, a project with a group of women from Iraq and Afghanistan and other places who create a book of their artwork in response to war in their own home countries. And they use some of the motifs and images from items that they saw from our collections. And they were able to explain a little bit about why those items were so important in their culture to the curators. So again, it's that kind of dialogue and not saying, here is our material, isn't it lovely? It's actually learning from groups. And on the right, you've got some show and tell of our Chinese collections. We worked with the Oxford Chinese community to show some of the things that families may not have had a chance to see that were very important in their culture, and then also to do a large-scale public event that shared the Spring Festival. So again, that brought a new audience into the Bodleian because a lot of the Chinese community from Oxford came who wouldn't normally otherwise come, and also exposed people who were in the Bodleian to that Chinese culture, which was very exciting. You can see the dancing there, which was really powerful. And then in the middle, we've got a piece of work from a collaborative artwork with the City Community Hospital, where they were doing stories of gifts to go with our Gifts and Books exhibition. and they were adding their favourite books to this artwork that then came to the Western Library, and we had a public event where people could add their own drawings, and then it went back to the City Hospital for people to kind of do some more artwork that they added to it. So it was a kind of back and forth reciprocal project where people were involved, and they were kind of sharing their ideas with each other. And then finally, we also work with special interest groups in different ways. And this is, again, as Michelle was saying, about developing a partnership and going to people where they are and offering an experience that works for them at that moment. And we try and see this as much more sustainable working. So some of the things I've been talking about, some of the larger events are kind of one-off events, but where we're working with small groups or where we're working with special interest groups, we want that to be a longer term partnership. So an example of that is our work with Give a Book, who are a charity who support prisoners. They provide books for them, for example, on their first night in prison, and they also have prison reading groups. So we've started working with a prison reading group. Firstly, we asked them to recommend books for the space for reading. So you can see an example there of a card that's been shared from a prisoner, and then they're reading some books, and they've recommended books to our book club that meets, and they're going to share feedback on each other's recommendations. So it's a long-term project. As you can imagine, they can't come to us, so we're just kind of building that dynamic slowly about sharing ideas about books with them. And I've mentioned the work with the City Community Hospital. We work with Oxfordshire Mind, so we've they come and meet in our space for reading. We've done creative writing and other projects with them. And we've started working with Oxfordshire AGK, who run a tea book scheme for older people having book clubs in their area. And one of the book clubs meets in the space for reading. So those are kind of quite light touch connections, and there's sort of ways of getting them into the Western Library and aware of the work we do. And we hope that the next stage will be connecting them with collections more directly. So we have hosted the Tea Books volunteers and done a show and tell with them. And we've done some more creative projects with Mind as well, where we've used exhibitions for inspiration. So hopefully that's given you a kind of flavour of all the different ways that you can use your collections with many, many different audiences. And I would say it's really working in partnership is essential, making it relevant and memorable, starting small and going deep, and never underestimating the power of the real and the wow factor. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Helen. That's a very good point on which to end. The power of the real and the wow factor, certainly. There isn't anything quite like the response you get from a group of people when you show them medieval manuscript or something like that for the first time. I think I could read the handwriting just enough. I rather like the note from the prison reading group. In answer to the question, is there a book you like that describes a journey? And somebody has suggested Papillon, which of course describes breaking out of prison.
So that is in the space for reading, and I sent a photograph of their books in the space for reading because it was actually really important to show that we had taken those ideas and we bought their books and they're there for everybody to read, and their stories are shared with all our general visitors that pick up those books. So it kind of hopefully gives them a sense of connection to the outside world. But yes, that was particularly amusing recommendation.
Good choice, yeah. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat. Well, while we're waiting for something, I thought it was interesting that you had these. There's always a tension, I think, isn't there, between preserving the library as a quiet space for reading and research, and there are very few of those quiet spaces, left in the world these days, but also inviting people in. And I liked how you struck. I thought that the creating the spaces for reading was quite a clever way of doing that in a way that invited people in, but sort of set the terms for their engagement. Have you had any of the other strategies that you could share that help to balance those competing priorities for sort of access, but also seclusion?
I think there's a sort of general understanding that the Western Library ground floor, Blackwell Hall as it's known, is not really a quiet space because it has the cafe in it, because it has the information desk where they sell tickets, because there are tour groups coming in from outside into the space. It's difficult to go in there and be quiet. So I think that's partly why the space reading is there. I think once you get outside of the public area, then you've obviously got the research areas and the reading rooms and all of that, and that is much quieter. But it is a challenge that we face, because if we're working with particular groups and we want to do something more sensitive, we don't have a space to do it in. So I'm hoping to start a book group for adults with learning disabilities, and I've actually booked one of the upstairs rooms, and we'll just have to see how that goes and if there's more demand and so on. But we also have a space I haven't mentioned because it wasn't adult audiences, called the Bodleian, so the Bodleian for toddlers, which is just a little family space where it has books and cushions and things. And again, that's just somewhere for that particular audience to be, but it's within the much bigger space. So it does depend. Sometimes the Blackwell Hall can be very quiet, depending on the day of the week and the weather and the time of year and all that kind of thing. But actually, we're probably working to make it more dynamic and more lively, rather than keeping that sense of it being as you might expect a library to be.
Do you think that libraries like the Bodleian and other places, whether or not they hold special collections, are stepping in to fill a gap, meet a demand that isn't being met as a consequence of local authority cuts and austerity, loss of public library services?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. And it's true of museums as well. Yes, I think we find a lot of people use the space for reading, some for reading, but also they have their tutorials there. They meet their friends there. They kind of have a Zoom call there, which we don't particularly like, if it's very loud. So actually, because they say, well, there's nowhere to go in Oxford where we can just sit and be and spend some time either thinking or reading, or there are very few spaces like that aren't sort of commercial shops or cafes and things like that. So absolutely. And I think that the more importantly is that community work, that kind of supporting particular groups to explore their needs or their interests in a safe space. I think the kind of some of the clubs maybe they used to run, or workshops they used to run, or services that used to be local authority funded are not there so much anymore. So cultural spaces are stepping in, definitely.
No, I thought your last slide was a really nice illustration of the sort of social impact, social with a kind of capital S rather than just a societal impact that that public engagement and community engagement activities can have with marginalized or underrepresented groups, which I think is really, really positive and really important. Do we have any, I don't want to monopolize the airspace, but if we have any questions from our audience, there's time to take a few before we close. We've had a comment from Brian Farramond, who has thanked everyone for the really fascinating presentations. He tells us that for several years he's been giving talks on medieval manuscripts to local history societies and WI groups at their venues. He takes along a number of manuscript leaves to illustrate the talks, which he passes around in plastic envelopes. The response is always very enthusiastic, and he hasn't lost a leaf yet. So, yes, there is always a challenge and a balance to be struck, I think, isn't there, between the security of a collection and providing access to it, and the capacity of curators to accommodate and facilitate visits.
And we can't take anything out, so we don't really have a handling collection, and we can print digital images as well, of course, but it's not quite the same. So that, thinking about what Michelle was saying about going out to the community, we would love to do more of that, but we also want people to come and see the real in our space as well. So
we've got a question from John Hodgson. He says, do you think that to be successful, community engagement activities should be thoroughly embedded in all aspects of the institution rather than being hived off to a separate team? As he realises this might be difficult to achieve in a large organisation like the Bodleian.
Yes, I think it's interesting. So the public engagement team has only really been in place since 2017 and started with one person. And it was only coming up to 2 years ago that the team expanded to sort of 2 full-time equivalent to work with particular audiences, plus admin support and a manager. So yes, I think it works much better if it is embedded and not an add-on. And one of the advantages of doing things in a public space and not having our own space to work in is that everybody sees what we're doing. And so more colleagues get involved and are interested and want to do this kind of work. But I would say, obviously, when we started, there were already colleagues that were doing public engagement, so it wasn't that there was nothing happening, but hopefully we've been able to accelerate that and with their support and reach more people. But yes, I think there is a risk that it gets seen as an add-on and a nice to have, and someone else's work. But I would also argue there's a specialism to it. So we hope that people would come through public engagement specialists to try and work into communities.
Helen, thanks very much. I think that brings us up to the end of the meeting, and a very nice paper to end on as well. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you again to all of our speakers, to Alison Ray for organising the event, and to John Hodgson for setting up the webinar. We will circulate a link to the recording once it's ready on the AMARC website, and we hope to see some of you, all of you, at future meetings, whether online or in person. Thank you very much for coming along.